I think these rooftop tents are absolutely incredible and very cool, but I still think ground tents are better. So in this video, I'm gonna go into the pluses and minuses, according to me, of ground tents and rooftop tents. Let's start with ground tents, then we'll get back to what's cool about these things. So this tent is $120, and I will absolutely not say it's as nice as that $4,000 Alu cab. But for $120, this tent, this is a new one, but this tent gave me 3 amazing years of off-road camping. And for your money, that's pretty awesome. So I am definitely giving a positive to ground tents, is that they are much cheaper. And this one has been a great tent for me. Now, another benefit of ground tents is that you do have some more ridiculous spots available to you when you can carry your tent down to a place, because the vehicles are not allowed everywhere, but tents sometimes are. And ground tents sometimes give you amazing views like this and some of the other ones I've been showing you. Now, another benefit to ground tents for me is someone that has 3 off-road vehicles. I can take the ground tent that I have and put them in whatever vehicle I am using for that trip. And that is definitely a benefit. If I had a rooftop tent, it's much harder to move them among vehicles. So if you have multiple vehicles that can go off-road, ground tents might be the way for you. Now, another negative of ground tents is that it is going to take up space inside your vehicle. So when you are limited on space like I am in this 2-door, some space is being taken up by a ground tent. Another positive of ground tents over rooftop tents is they are way easier to get into. You don't have to climb up a ladder and you're instantly in. This is also beneficial for those of you that have elderly pets or anything like that. They can get in here with you without having to go up a ladder. Now, ground tents are gonna offer you way more space than an equivalent rooftop tent. So you have so much more space for your stuff to get dressed in. This is definitely better on space. Now, this tent has a very quick setup time that rivals rooftop tents. This one, if I'm really rushing, I can get it up in about 1 minute and 30 seconds. But traditionally, I take my time with it, and I'll say it's about a 3 to 4 minute setup time. And that's usually about the same amount of time that my friends in rooftop tents take to set up their tents. Now, the most impressive thing about ground tents for me is that you can set up your ground tent and then go get into your Jeep and go wheel some more. You got that spot saved, and that is probably the greatest benefit from ground tents, is that your day's not over once you set up camp. All right, guys, this is another negative to ground tents, is that even though you get some amazing spots, it may not be as Instagram cool as a rooftop tent. All right, another positive of ground tents is that you can shelter them from the wind easier. At least based on my experience of talking with my buddies with rooftop tents, they do complain about wind quite often, but I've never really had any issues with wind. If I was gonna put a rooftop tent on there, I am definitely limited with the options that I can have, but with a Jeep like this, there's all kinds of ground tents that I can fit in there. Now, here's a tip for you ground tent people. Definitely stop wasting time with those tents you have to set up. Get an instant tent, either a Gazelle, this Coleman, or I'd really love to see more tent manufacturers get into the instant game using better materials than this one. That would be an absolute game changer. Now, this is probably the best part about rooftop tents. Sleeping up high is fun. I actually really enjoy being up high and kind of looking over. In the morning tomorrow, I'm gonna be overlooking this water crossing. This is a water crossing that vehicles go through. Maybe I will catch one. All right, guys, another positive of rooftop tents is, you know, when it's raining really hard and stuff starts puddling, you know, by having your tent up there, you don't have to worry about the base of your tent getting all soggy. Now, I haven't really run into this in my camping experiences because I really love my ground tent. It has its basically footprint built into it. So another positive about using rooftop tents is it's sometimes easier to stabilize your rooftop tent than it is to use a ground tent. Granted, you can move your ground tent to a more suitable place, sometimes easier than you can move your vehicle, but you at least have the option with a rooftop tent to throw some blocks on there to give yourself a nice, even sleeping service. Now guys, I knew a storm was coming in, so I was able to get that quickly set up. It probably took me maybe 3 minutes to get the awning out and the rooftop tent up. No big deal, especially with the storm coming in. Now I do have a lightning fast ground tent set up, but usually a rooftop tent is going to be quicker to set up than a ground tent. So this is a very nice feature of rooftop tents. You do not need to think about it. It is always on your vehicle. You just basically get in your vehicle and go on an adventure. Your tent is already there. All right, guys, you know who lives back there: black bears, mountain lions, and all kinds of other wildlife creatures. And that is another positive for rooftop tents. They are less likely to climb up that ladder and get you. Now, I am exaggerating a little bit. You are relatively safe in a ground tent. However, you're gonna probably be a bit safer in a rooftop tent. Now, in grizzly country, I wouldn't trust that or a ground tent. You need something like my off-road camper for those guys. Sure, that's gonna get wet, but it's gonna be so much easier to get dry, to open it up, air it up at home, because all you gotta do is get into your parking spot, pop it up when it's dry, let it air out. This is another one of my favorite features about rooftop tents. You can leave all your bedding, your sleeping bag, your pillows in the tent for many of these rooftop tents, and you have it all ready to go. The worst part about my ground tent is packing up this sleeping bag, and for the last 3 days, I've just left it in the rooftop tent. Now guys, I consider myself an off-road camper, or mostly an off-roader, so I do not want to do anything that adversely affects my wheeling ability. And you know, for the most part, you're putting weight up top with a rooftop tent, and that is going to adversely affect your ability to wheel tougher trails. Granted, it is not as much as people will tell you, but there is some concern. Like, I definitely like having this hard shell tent because I definitely hit some branches as I was wheeling. But the other concern is when you are on a very unstable or slippery slope, you now have weight on the top that you didn't have. Most off-roaders are built with the weight down low to keep that center of gravity low and hopefully not roll you over on some sketchy terrain. Well, as awesome as rooftop tents are, there is definitely a huge disadvantage. It is hard to change in one like this. Now, I have seen bigger rooftop tents and it may be easier to change. However, you are up high and you have to bend over and all that kind of good stuff. It's just, I find it much easier to change in my ground tent and to get ready for the next day's wheeling. Now, this Alucab is absolutely amazing. You can tell that they have taken a lot of time to develop a great little rooftop tent. However, that brings me to probably the biggest negative of rooftop tents. This Alucab is not cheap. I am almost certain this is in the thousands of dollars. I will put that on there. And to me, that is such a wild expense to get into overlanding, to get into off-road camping, car camping. I definitely recommend start with a ground tent. Start with a ground tent like mine. It's only 120 bucks. It sets up in minutes and you can have, you know, really great spots with it. That is my breakdown of rooftop tents and ground tents, and honestly, I am very surprised by the results. My plan has always been to put a rooftop tent on that Jeep Liberty, but now I'm not so sure. Now I'm thinking I could spend that money, you know, more on modifications that I want to do to this. I want this to have a rear locker. That's not cheap. I want to do other stuff with this Jeep Liberty to make it the ultimate overlander. And when I talk about overlanding, I mean off-road camping. This thing needs to keep going off-road. It needs to be the coolest vehicle out there, which I think it is. But this kind of video is not what we make here. We make off-road trail guides and overland guides. I'm gonna be editing overland guides all winter. They are awesome. They're multi-day trips that you can do with your vehicle, even if it is a Jeep Liberty.